Why was everyone suddenly silent? The question hung in the air like smoke after a blast, thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. The hangar trembled. It wasn't thunder. The sky outside was clear, but the air still shuddered with violence. Mortars slammed into the sand, rattling the corrugated walls like a beast trying to claw its way in. Dust rained down from steel beams. Radios screamed and coughed static. Someone yelled for cover. Someone else was praying under their breath. Through it all, the metallic scent of jet fuel mixed with blood and panic. Any Apache pilot on base? The call came sharp through the comms, desperate, raw, and echoing off every steel surface. And then nothing. Every wrench froze mid-turn. Every mechanic, every soldier in the hangar turned toward the loudspeaker like it had just spoken a curse. You could feel it, the weight of that silence pressing down on every chest. Outside, the explosions rolled closer. Another impact shook the ground, sending a ripple through the fuel lines. No one moved. Until one voice did. "I can fly it." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the chaos like a blade. Heads turned toward the source, a mechanic, barely 5'4", face smudged with grease and eyes that had seen too many broken machines come back to life. Sergeant Amelia Parker. The woman everyone knew, by the sound of her wrench before her name. She wasn't supposed to be the one to speak. She wasn't even supposed to be in the conversation. But when death comes knocking on steel doors, rank and title stop mattering. And so the hangar turned toward her. The lieutenant colonel stormed in moments later, soot streaking his face, voice raw with urgency. "We need air support now. Any Apache pilot on base." Still the silence lingered. The pilots were either out or gone. And then again, that voice, steady this time. "Sir, I can fly it." For a second the colonel just stared, the kind of look that measures a person's sanity. "Your maintenance crew," he said slowly. "You're not flight certified." Mia met his eyes, her jaw tight, her heart steady. "No, sir, but I know that bird better than anyone here. I built her. I can keep her alive." The colonel's eyes flicked toward the flight line. Two Apache lay twisted, burning carcasses of once-proud machines. Only one bird remained untouched, the one she had spent all night repairing. Outside, another explosion sent a shockwave through the hangar. The walls groaned. Someone shouted to get down. The colonel hesitated, torn between protocol and survival. The manual said no. The war outside said now. And sometimes, now doesn't wait for permission. He looked her dead in the eye. "Get it airborne, Sergeant." A pause. "That's an order." She didn't wait to breathe, didn't look back to see who was watching. Helmet in hand, she sprinted through the smoke. Her boots pounded against scorched concrete. The air shimmered with heat and dust as sirens wailed above the distant roar of artillery. Ahead of her stood Apache 734, the machine she had practically rebuilt from the skeleton up. Its black paint reflected the firelight like armor. It wasn't just metal to her. It was memory. It was purpose. She climbed the stub wing and slid into the cockpit. Every movement was smooth, instinctive, like she'd done it 100 times in dreams she'd never admit to having. The smell of hydraulic fluid and scorched oil filled the air. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, her father, Captain Daniel Parker, smiling beside a Huey, the sun sharp behind him. She taped it above the altimeter, right where her eyes could find it in the hardest moments. "For Dad who flew," she whispered, her fingers trembling, "so I could dream." Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight only she could feel. Power on. Auxiliary fuel engaged. Hydraulics steady. Rotors beginning to spin. The hangar filled with wind and dust as the Apache came alive. The turbines howled, the blades blurred, and the vibration rattled through her bones like a second heartbeat. The ground crew shielded their faces, staring in disbelief. The mechanic, the quiet one, was about to fly into combat. Over her headset came the colonel's voice again, still edged with disbelief. "Mechanic or not, you're our only air support. Call sign, Grease 1. Her gloved hand gripped the cyclic. "Copy that," she said, steady and calm. "Grease 1 lifting off." The moment the skids left the earth, everything inside her changed. The world below turned into a blur of dust and flame. The base shrank into the desert, and for the first time in her life, Amelia Parker, the girl who had been told she wasn't good enough to fly, was free. But that freedom didn't come with peace. It came with the sound of gunfire over the comms. "They're breaching the line, 28 men pinned down. Grid 45, Grease 1, you see them." Her HUD flickered to life. Targets painted themselves in cold green boxes across the horizon. 5 vehicles, dust trails like fingers reaching for the base. The lead truck had a heavy mount. The second may be mortars. She angled the stick forward. The Apache obeyed like it knew her thoughts. She lined up the first shot. Hydra rockets armed, a soft whine in her headset. Her finger hovered over the trigger. For a moment, she thought of her father, his hand guiding hers over the simulator controls when she was 12. "The sky is where you find who you really are," he'd said. Now she was about to find out. "Breathe in, breathe out," she whispered. Then squeezed. The rocket streaked across the sky like an angry comet. A heartbeat later, an explosion. The lead vehicle vanished in a storm of flame and sand. The shockwave rippled through her chest. "Direct hit, Grease 1, direct hit," someone shouted through the comms. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but something deeper, purpose. She swung low, the Apache banking hard over the burning convoy. The 30 chain gun roared, spitting fire and brass. Tracer rounds carved the desert until another vehicle rolled and died. Then the sound, a warning tone that sent ice down her spine. "Missile lock." Her blood turned to electricity. Her training, unofficial as it was, took over. Countermeasures, hard right, flares out. She slammed the control and the Apache bucked violently. A blinding flare shot into the air. The incoming missile veered, then exploded just 50 meters off her tail. The blast rattled her teeth, shaking every bolt of the bird she had built. For a moment, everything was white smoke, sand, silence. Then the cockpit alarms lit up red. "Grease 1, you're smoking," the colonel barked. She glanced at the instruments, tail rotor RPM fluctuating, shrapnel damage, stabilizer compromised, minutes of flight time left, maybe less. Command came over the radio again. "Return to base immediately. That's an order." She stared at the horizon. The convoy was still moving. 28 men were still pinned. Her breathing slowed, her fingers steadied. "No, sir," she said quietly, voice like steel. "If I don't finish this, they die." There was static on the line, the kind that carries the sound of disbelief, maybe even respect. Then nothing. She dove back toward the convoy, the Apache shaking like a wounded animal. The tail fought her controls. Every correction was a battle, every second a question of whether the machine could take one more command. But she flew. 2 more rockets fired. 2 more targets erased in fire and thunder. The desert lit up in chaos, but through it all, her heartbeat stayed steady. The voice of a single woman against the sound of war. Then silence. Grease 1 convoy destroyed. Contact broken, they're falling back. The cheers over the radio came fractured, breathless, full of disbelief. Soldiers on the ground, alive because she didn't turn back. But her bird was dying. The warning lights flickered red to orange to red again. The rotor's vibration deepened into a groan. She coaxed the Apache toward home, each movement deliberate, gentle, like keeping a promise. The desert rolled beneath her, scarred, smoking, alive. The base rose into view like a mirage. "Come on, girl," she whispered. "1 more mile." The landing was rough, bone rattling, teeth clenching. The Apache hit hard, bounced, screamed, then finally settled into silence. For a long second, there was nothing but the ringing in her ears. Then the hangar doors burst open. Soldiers ran, shouting, crying, cheering. Boots pounded the ground. The colonel appeared through the haze, eyes locked on her. His face unreadable, no anger, no relief, just the weight of command and the shadow of something like awe. She slid down the ladder, boots hitting the dirt. Her legs trembled, but she stood tall. He stopped in front of her. "Sergeant Parker," he said, voice flat, "you violated a direct order." The silence around them was heavy, waiting. Then his tone changed, quieter. "And you saved 44 lives." His hand rose, sharp and deliberate, a salute. For a heartbeat she couldn't move. Then slowly she saluted back. Behind them the soldiers erupted, cheering, chanting her call sign. "Grease one, Grease one." She looked up at the sky, the same sky her father once called freedom, and whispered just loud enough for herself. "We did it, Dad." And for the first time in years, she felt weightless. Not because she was flying, but because she had finally landed where she was meant to be. Why was the hangar so quiet now, when only hours ago it had sounded like the end of the world? The rotors had stopped spinning, but the vibration still lived in the bones of everyone who'd witnessed it. Dust hung suspended in thin rays of light cutting through bullet holes in the sheet metal roof. The Apache sat there, wounded, steaming, sacred like an altar that had just eaten lightning and survived. Sergeant Amelia Parker stood beside it, helmet under her arm, hair damp with sweat, grease streaking her face. Around her, the base was alive again. Soldiers moved in and out of the hangar, some limping, some laughing, all staring at her like they were still deciding if what they saw had really happened. "Grease one," someone whispered. And the name stuck. A mechanic pushed past her, eyes wet. He said nothing, just reached out, touched the Apache's scorched skin like it was holy, and nodded once before walking away. Another man followed, then another, until the space around her was full of motion again, full of life she had helped preserve. But inside her, silence. Not peace, not pride, just a long, fragile silence that felt like the moment between two heartbeats. The colonel's voice finally broke through it. "You did good, Sergeant," he said quietly, his tone softer than anyone had ever heard. "But we've got a lot of explaining to do." She nodded, throat tight. "Yes, sir." He glanced at the bird again, his jaw flexing. "You flew her like she was part of you." Mia looked up, blinking against the bright afternoon light leaking through the open hangar doors. "She is, sir," she said softly. "Every bolt, every panel, I put them there." The colonel didn't smile. He just gave one of those small, tired nods men give when they understand something words can't carry, then walked away. By nightfall, the desert was still burning somewhere beyond the horizon, but Hawk's Nest Base had quieted. The dead were counted, the wounded were tended, and the air was filled with the metallic scent of aftermath. Mia sat alone on a crate beside the Apache, her knees aching, her hands raw and trembling. The adrenaline was gone now, leaving the heavy ache of survival, the kind that feels like guilt if you look at it too long. Her helmet lay beside her, visor cracked, edges charred. On the console inside, her father's photograph still fluttered in the heat like a heartbeat that refused to stop. She reached for it, then stopped. Because for the first time, she was afraid to touch it. As if by touching it, she might finally feel everything she'd been holding back since the crash, since his death, since the years of being told she wasn't enough to carry on his wings. The night pressed in, quiet but heavy. From somewhere behind her, a voice spoke, older, worn, familiar. Couldn't sleep either. She turned. Lieutenant Colonel Whitman leaned against the hangar doorway, arms folded, fatigue jacket unbuttoned. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of rest but from too much command. Mia straightened a little instinctively. "Sir." He waved it off. At ease. I'm not here to make you stand on ceremony. He paused, glancing toward the Apache. You know, when I told you to take her up, I thought I was sending you to your death. She looked back at the bird, the blackened rotor tips, the scarred fuselage, the faint reflection of stars in the cockpit glass. So did I, sir. That made him chuckle once, a low, weary sound that died quickly in the open air. You saved 44 lives, Parker. 44 men who get to go home because you ignored me. She turned her eyes toward the horizon, where a faint orange glow marked distant fires still burning. I didn't ignore you, sir. I just listened to something louder. What's that? He asked. She hesitated, then instinct. He nodded, like that word made sense in a world where too many things didn't. They stood there a long while, the silence between them comfortable now. Two people who'd seen too much light in the dark. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter. You think command's gonna court-martial me? He looked at her, really looked. I think they're gonna ask a lot of questions, he admitted, and I think you should be ready for all of them. Her throat tightened, and if they decide I shouldn't have. He cut her off gently. Then I'll tell them what I saw. A mechanic who refused to let good men die because a book told her she wasn't allowed to fly. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Get some rest, Parker, you're going to need it. She watched him disappear into the night. And for the first time since the attack began, she allowed herself to close her eyes. The investigation started at dawn. 3 suits from the Pentagon, 2 flight auditors, 1 camera recording every word. They arrived in an unmarked Black Hawk, stepping out like ghosts into the early desert light. The hangar became an interrogation room, the air heavy with tension. They asked about procedures, authorizations, training records. They asked how a non-certified mechanic gained access to a flight-ready Apache. They asked how she managed combat maneuvers that only certified pilots could perform. She answered calmly. One question at a time. Every answer a fact. Every pause, a heartbeat measured between truth and survival. I know those systems better than most pilots, sir, she said, her voice steady. I've rebuilt every one of them with my own hands. One of the auditors leaned forward, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. But rebuilding a helicopter isn't the same as flying one in combat. Mia met his gaze. No, it's harder, because when you rebuild something, you live with every mistake. Every bolt that slips, every wire that's too tight, every sound that doesn't belong. You feel it before it kills someone. The room went still. Whitman, standing in the back, watched in silence. The questioning went on for hours. They showed her the footage from her helmet cam, the explosion, the evasive maneuver, the missile that missed by 50 meters. They slowed it down, frame by frame. One of them whispered to another, almost impressed. That tail rotor compensation, that's textbook recovery. Textbook, the older investigator muttered. It's art. Whitman's eyes flicked to Mia. She was sitting there, hands folded, face calm but pale. When they finally dismissed her, she didn't walk out proud. She walked out tired, as if the weight of 44 lives had settled somewhere deep inside her ribs and refused to leave. Outside, the wind was sharp. The horizon was clean for the first time in days. She stood there, watching the sun rise over the scorched desert, and for a moment she could almost hear the sound of her father's voice, the calm, patient tone he used when explaining aerodynamics to a 12-year-old sitting, cross-legged by a simulator. The sky isn't for everyone, Mia, but if it ever calls you, you'll know. Maybe that's what this was, not a choice, a calling. The verdict came 3 weeks later. No punishment, no reprimand. Instead, a commendation for valor and an honorary pilot designation. The document was short, formal, typed in military precision. Sergeant Amelia Parker, call sign, Grease 1. When Whitman handed her the folder, he didn't smile. He just said, Your father would have been proud. And that was the first time she couldn't hold back the tears. Not the big, cinematic kind, just the quiet ones that burn because they've waited too long to fall. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He nodded, turned to leave, then stopped halfway. "You know," he said, glancing back with a half-smile, "that day when you volunteered you broke about a dozen regulations." She managed a faint grin. "Worth it." He shrugged. "Ask the 44 men who walked away." Then he left her alone with the paper, with her name, her call sign, and the silence of the hangar that had once been her entire world. That night she walked out to the tarmac. The stars were brighter now, the smoke gone, the desert air cold enough to sting her lungs. She stood beside the Apache, her Apache, the one they'd decided to retire rather than repair. It would stay there, a relic of defiance. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the cracked canopy. She pressed a hand to the metal, feeling the roughness of scars left by shrapnel and fire. "You held on," she murmured. "When everything else broke, you held on." She closed her eyes. For the first time, she let herself remember the crash that took her father, the report, the folded flag, the empty house, the years of fixing other people's wings because she couldn't earn her own. And now this. A war, a mission, a choice that no one would have made but her. She smiled small, tired, proud. The wind carried the faint echo of distant rotor blades, maybe another Apache lifting off for patrol. She looked up toward the sound, watching until it disappeared into the dark. The corners of her mouth lifted. "Keep them safe," she whispered. Then she turned back toward the hangar, the place where it all began, and walked away, her shadow long and thin across the tarmac, swallowed by the morning light that was just beginning to rise. Sometimes courage doesn't sound like shouting. Sometimes it's the quiet sentence that no one expects you to say. "I can fly it." And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Why did the silence feel louder in peace than it ever had in war? 6 months had passed. The smell of jet fuel and smoke had been replaced by chalk dust and coffee. Hawk's Nest was a memory now, a scar on a map, sealed under sand and distance. But for Sergeant Amelia Parker, the echoes still lived somewhere behind her ribs. The war zone had become a classroom. Fort Rucker, Alabama. A place where soldiers learned to fly before they ever faced the sky. Inside an old, sun-bleached building, ceiling fans spun lazily overhead. Rows of recruits sat behind narrow desks, faces young, uniforms stiff, eyes still unscarred by years of oil, grit, or loss. At the front of the room stood Mia. Different uniform now, cleaner, pressed, but the same calloused hands, the same grease-etched lines around her knuckles. The badge on her chest still read Sergeant A. Parker, Grease 1. On the whiteboard behind her, hand-drawn diagrams of rotor assemblies filled the space. Numbers, torque ratios, hydraulic pressures, all the language of machines she had once spoken fluently, before she ever knew what it meant to fly one. But today's lesson wasn't about machines. Today was about people. She clicked the marker shut and turned to face the class. Her voice carried the kind of quiet strength that came from knowing death up close. "Rules keep us alive," she began, letting her words settle. "But when chaos hits, and it will, rules can't always tell you what to do next." The students watched her in silence. Some scribbled notes, most didn't dare blink. "When that happens," she continued, packing slowly, "character decides who stands up." She paused, and for a moment her mind flashed back. The hangar, the dust, the silence after that call, any Apache pilot on base. No one answering. Until she did. She didn't tell them that part, not yet. At the back of the room, Lieutenant Colonel Whitman leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smile behind his coffee mug. He didn't interrupt. He'd heard this story before, not from her lips, but from the lives she'd changed. A hand went up, A young trainee, maybe 20, nervous but curious. "Sergeant," he said, "what if we stand up and we fail?" The room went still. Mia studied him for a long moment, that face too young to know what failure really costs. Then she said softly, "Then you fail." A few recruits exchanged uncertain looks. She didn't let them off easy. "But at least you tried," she added. "The only thing worse than failure is watching others fall because you were too afraid to move." The words hung there, sinking deep. Because they weren't theory. They were truth, carried through fire and noise and the kind of silence that only comes after survival. When the bell rang, the class stayed seated longer than usual. Some smiled faintly. Some looked shaken. All of them knew they'd just learned something no manual could teach. As they filed out, Whitman stepped into the light. "You're getting good at that," he said, setting his empty mug on a desk. She smirked faintly. "At what?" "Sounding like you believe you're not still out there," he said. She didn't answer, because part of her still was. Later that evening, the base was quiet. The setting sun painted the hangar windows in shades of gold and rust. The hum of distant rotor blades drifted through the air, familiar, comforting, dangerous. Mia walked the corridors alone. She stayed after class like she always did. Old habits died hard. The empty hallways reminded her of the hangars back at Hawk's Nest, wide, echoing spaces where her thoughts had room to move. She stopped in front of a small glass display built into the wall. Inside were photographs, instructors, graduates, lost airmen, names etched into brass plaques. But one case stood out. Two flight badges sat side by side. The first, worn and tarnished, Captain D. Parker, fly safe. The second, new and gleaming, Sergeant A. Parker, grease one. Between them, a faded photograph. A man and a young girl beside an old Huey, both smiling into the sun. Mia's breath caught. She'd seen this display before, but somehow it felt different tonight. Maybe because now, for the first time, she finally understood what it meant to earn her place there. She touched the glass lightly. Her reflection merged with her father's smile, like the two of them finally shared the same sky. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain, a storm building far off. Mia sat on a bench just beyond the flight line, watching the training Apache resting in neat rows under floodlights. None of them knew what it meant to bleed, not yet. Their paint was clean, their rotors perfect. But one day, someone would climb inside one of those machines and learn that flying is never just about the air, it's about decisions. Whitman joined her quietly, sitting on the bench without a word. He offered her a thermos. She took it, grateful for the warmth. "Still think about that day?" he asked. She exhaled, the wind lifting a strand of hair across her face. "Every day, sir." He nodded, eyes on the horizon. "I do too." For a moment they just sat there, the night stretching wide around them. Then she spoke, the question she'd never asked before. "When you gave that order to let me fly, what made you say yes?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Honestly, I don't know, maybe desperation, maybe instinct. Maybe I just looked at you and saw someone who'd already made the decision for me." She smiled faintly. "I almost didn't." He turned to her. "What changed your mind?" Her gaze drifted toward the sky. "The sound," she said quietly. "The sound of silence after that call, any Apache pilot on base. It wasn't supposed to be me. But when no one answered, I realized maybe it always was." The colonel studied her face, not as a subordinate, not as a soldier, but as someone who'd done what most people can't, act when it mattered. "You ever think about going for certification?" he asked. "Make it official this time." Mia chuckled softly. "You mean actually earn the wings I already flew with?" He smiled, "Something like that." She shook her head. "No, I don't need paper to tell me I did it, I already know." He nodded. "Your father would have said the same." That silence again, not empty, just full of things words didn't need to touch. Back in her quarters, the room was quiet except for the soft hum of an old desk lamp. Her helmet, the same one from Hawk's Nest, sat on the table, cracked and faded. She kept it, even though regulation said to replace damaged equipment. Beside it was the photograph from the cockpit, her father smiling, hand on her shoulder. She stared at it for a long time. Then she took a pen from her pocket and wrote something on the back. "We fixed the bird, Dad, then we flew it." She smiled through the sting in her eyes, folded the photo, and slipped it into her journal. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. The first drops of rain tapped softly against the window, slow, steady, cleansing. Mia leaned back in her chair and listened. For the first time in years, the sound didn't remind her of mortars. It reminded her of heartbeat. The next morning, she walked into the hangar earlier than usual. The students hadn't arrived yet. The lights hummed softly. She moved between the parked Apache like someone walking through a chapel. Each one gleamed under the fluorescent glow, mechanical perfection, waiting for purpose. She stopped beside the simulator at the far end of the hangar, an old model, dust-covered, its screens dark. She brushed her hand across it, smiling faintly. This was where it all began, where she'd sat night after shifts, training in secret, chasing a dream she wasn't supposed to have. She powered it up. The fans whined to life, the monitors flickered ghost blue, the hum of virtual rotors filled the air. She sat in the seat, hands on the controls. The screen showed a familiar horizon, digital desert, sunrise over sand. For a moment, it didn't matter that it wasn't real. It felt like home. She closed her eyes and whispered, ready to lift off, Grease 1. The words brought a small, steady smile. Because sometimes, courage doesn't vanish when the fight ends. It just finds a new place to live. In classrooms. In memories. In the hands of the next person, ready to say, I can fly it. Outside, the day broke wide and bright. Students gathered on the flight line, laughing, stretching, unaware of the legacy that waited just beyond their reach. From her window, Mia watched them, young, fearless, full of dreams. And for the first time since Hawk's Nest, she felt peace. Not because the war was over, but because she had finally turned it into something worth teaching. Sometimes heroes don't build monuments. They build lessons. And if those lessons outlive them, maybe that's enough. Why did she still dream in static and smoke? Every night it came back, the low whine of a failing engine, the slow spin of a horizon turning upside down, and her father's voice fatting through the radio. Mayday, controls unresponsive, tell Mia. Then silence. The kind that never ends. She woke up gasping. The barracks room was dark except for the pale blue glow of the clock. 03:27 hours. Rain whispered against the window. Her hands trembled as she pressed her palms against her eyes, forcing her breathing to slow. Just a dream, she whispered. It's over. But the truth was, it never really was. She swung her legs off the bunk, feet touching the cold floor. Her muscles ached from another long day at the academy, teaching, debriefing, pretending the quiet didn't get to her. She slipped into her jacket and stepped outside. The corridor smelled faintly of polish and rain. Somewhere down the hall, a janitor's radio played an old country song, tinny and soft. The sound grounded her, something human in the sterile stillness of Fort Rucker nights. She walked toward the hangar. The rain had thinned to a drizzle by the time she stepped into the vast space. Rows of helicopters sat under dim yellow lights, their shadows stretching long across the concrete. The sound of dripping water echoed through the rafters. She found herself drawn, as always, to the old simulator tucked in the corner. It hummed faintly when she brushed her fingers against it. Her reflection wavered in the dark screen, older now, sharper around the eyes. How many hours did we spend in here, huh? She murmured, almost smiling. You, me, and the ghosts of a dream. She powered it up. The screen flickered. The cockpit lit with a familiar blue hue. Her hands found the controls automatically. The simulated horizon rolled out before her, digital desert, faint dawn breaking. For a while she just sat there, listening to the whir of the fans, the soft clatter of simulated rotors. Then slowly she began to speak not to the computer, but to the memory sitting beside her. "I used to think if I just learned enough, fixed enough, maybe I could earn it," she said. "Earn the sky, earn you." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. "When they told me I couldn't fly because of my eyesight, I swore I wouldn't cry. I came here that night, powered this thing on, alone, and I promised I'd never give up. But what I didn't say out loud was that I hated you for leaving me up there by myself." The rain outside grew heavier. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Mia stared straight ahead at the digital horizon, her hands still gripping the controls. "You always said the sky was freedom," she whispered, "but for 12 years it felt like a prison I couldn't reach." The simulator hummed softly, the artificial hum of turbine blades almost comforting. And then she shut it off. The screens died. The room fell into silence again. She sat there, breathing slowly, until the weight in her chest eased just enough for her to stand. The next morning, she walked into class earlier than usual. The recruits were already buzzing, caffeine and ambition in equal measure. Someone was talking about upcoming evaluation flights. Another was complaining about hydraulic drills. Mia leaned against the desk, watching them, their energy, their youth. And somewhere deep inside, something stirred. Maybe pride, maybe worry. "All right," she said finally, "let's talk about failure." The room quieted instantly. She walked to the board, drew a quick sketch of a rotor assembly, then crossed it out with a firm line. "This," she said, tapping the X, "is what happens when you stop paying attention, when you assume the checklist knows more than you do." A few nervous laughs. She didn't smile. "Machines fail," she said. "People panic. The manual won't save you then. What will is discipline, not the kind you get from push-ups or yelling, the kind that lives in silence, the kind that whispers, stay calm, think, move." Her voice softened. "I learned that the hard way." A trainee raised his hand. "You mean in combat, Sergeant?" Mia met his gaze. "Yeah," she said quietly, "in combat, but the first time wasn't in war, it was when I was 12. The room went still, even the air seemed to wait. She turned to the board, drawing slow, deliberate lines, not diagrams now, but the rough outline of a helicopter. "My father was an Air Force pilot," she said. "Captain Daniel Parker. He taught me what lift meant before I could spell it. I used to sit in a simulator beside him. He'd let me hold the stick while he explained how small movements could change everything." Her hand paused halfway through the drawing. "The day he died, I was at school. They said it was engine failure. Low altitude, no survivors." A beat. "I remember staring at the clouds that night, trying to see which one he'd become." The class was silent. No one looked away. Mia turned back toward them, eyes bright but steady. "That's when I decided I'd never let another machine fail on my watch. I thought, if I could fix them, maybe I could fix what broke that day." She set the marker down gently. "And maybe that's why, when everything went wrong at Hawk's Nest, I didn't think. I just moved." No one spoke for several seconds. Then one trainee, the same young man who had once asked about failure, whispered, "You think he was watching you that day?" Mia's eyes softened. "I don't think," she said, "I know." That night, after everyone left, she found Whitman waiting near the hangar entrance. He had that look, the one commanders wear when they've been listening to stories that weren't meant for them. "Hell of a lesson today," he said. She shrugged. "They asked." He tilted his head. "And you answered." She didn't respond. He studied her for a moment. "You ever think maybe teaching them is how you make peace with it?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe peace isn't the goal, sir. Maybe just understanding." He nodded, quiet. You know, Parker, when I first met you, I thought you were reckless. Now I think you're the calmest person on base. She laughed softly. You thought I was reckless. You volunteered to fly an Apache with no certification during an active strike, he said dryly. That qualifies. Fair point, she admitted, smiling. The colonel leaned against the railing, looking out over the dim runway lights. You know, the Army's launching a new crisis flight readiness program. Mechanics, engineers, techs, people like you, training them to fly in emergencies. She raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerously familiar. He grinned. Exactly. We need instructors who understand both sides, the wrench and the rotor. You in? Her answer came without hesitation. Yes, sir. He nodded once. Good, first briefing's next week. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Sir. He looked back. Why me? He smiled, a rare, genuine one. Because when everything went quiet, you were the only one who spoke. That night she returned to her quarters, rain still tapping softly on the window. The base was quiet again, the way she liked it. She took out her father's photograph, the one she'd taped above the altimeter that day. The edges were torn now, the image faded, but his smile was still there, calm, proud, unbreakable. I think I get it now, she whispered. You weren't teaching me how to fly, you were teaching me how to stand up. She placed the photo beside her cracked helmet, side by side on the desk, the past and the present, finally sharing the same light. Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time she didn't flinch. She listened. Because for the first time it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like home. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or medals. It comes quietly, through the echo of lessons passed on, the weight of stories retold, and the sound of rain reminding you that the storm has finally moved on. Why was she shaking? The morning was calm, clear skies, light wind, the kind of day pilots pray for. Yet Sergeant Amelia Parker's hands trembled around her coffee cup as she stood near the airfield's edge. Not from fear, not exactly. From memory. Today wasn't another classroom session. Today was her first day leading a live response simulation, the new crisis flight readiness program that Lieutenant Colonel Whitman had designed and she'd helped build. This was what she'd agreed to teach mechanics how to do what she once did, fly when no one else could. But watching them now, 5 recruits in fresh fatigues, adjusting helmets, fumbling with harnesses, she felt a familiar ache rise in her chest. It was the same ache that comes when you realize courage can't be taught, only tested. Whitman stood beside her, arms folded, squinting against the sunlight. They look nervous, he said. They should be, Mia replied. Today, they'll learn what it means to make a decision no one else will. He glanced at her. You ready for this? She nodded. I've been ready since Hawk's Nest. He smiled faintly. That's what I was afraid of. The hangar doors rolled open. Inside waited the simulator, not the dusty old one she trained on, but a full-motion flight pod built from an actual Apache shell. The Army had spared no expense after her mission had rewritten procedure books. The recruits filed in, chatter dying as they took in the machine's sheer presence. It gleamed under the floodlights, black, angular, alive. Mia stepped forward, voice calm but sharp. This is Grease 1 protocol training. You've read the manuals, you've studied flight systems. But today, you'll learn the one thing no book can teach you, what it feels like when everything starts to fall apart. She let that sink in. Each of you will get one scenario. System failures, smoke, loss of comms. You'll decide what to do. You'll hear alarms, shouting, maybe even screaming. That's by design. A few recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Mia softened slightly. Don't worry, you won't die here. You'll just learn how not to. That earned a few nervous laughs. Then she added quietly, unless you freeze. Silence again, the kind that humbles. Because freezing, she said, kills faster than bullets. The first 3 recruits did well. Shaky hands, clumsy controls, but they listened, moved, thought. The simulator's alarms blared, fake smoke filled the pod, voices from the headset shouted scripted panic, and still, they managed to keep their heads. Mia watched from the control station, eyes sharp, nodding every instinct, every breath. Then came the 4th recruit, Private Ellis. Barely 22, a good mechanic, smart, methodical, maybe too careful. He climbed into the cockpit, adjusted his straps, and gave a thumbs-up through the glass. "All right, Ellis," Mia said over the comms. "Scenario, engine 1 flame out mid-descent, 20 seconds to impact. You'll need to stabilize and auto-rotate. Ready." "Ready, Sergeant." "Then let's see what you've got." The simulation roared to life. The virtual desert spun across the screens. Warning lights flashed red. The cockpit filled with the familiar chaos of failure, alarms, rattles, the machine groaning under imaginary pressure. "Engine 1 out," Ellis called, voice tight. "Compensate with collective," Mia coached. "Don't overcorrect, breathe." For the first few seconds, he did fine. Smooth motions, good control. Then another warning blared, simulated missile lock. It wasn't part of the script. Mia blinked, confused. The system must have triggered an overlap in the program. Inside, Ellis froze. His hands stopped moving. "Private, stay focused," Mia ordered. "It's a false alert. Maintain rotation." But he wasn't listening. He stared at the blinking red icon, breathing fast. "Ellis," she barked, "move, stay with it." Still nothing. His hands hovered over the controls, paralyzed by indecision. And then, as the simulator's motion hydraulics jerked violently to simulate a crash, she heard him whisper, voice cracking. I can't do it." Something inside Mia snapped. The air around her disappeared, replaced by sand and thunder and the echo of that same sentence from years ago. Any Apache pilot on base. No answer, silence. Her throat tightened. She slammed the override button. "I'm coming in." Before anyone could stop her, she pulled open the pod hatch and climbed inside, crouching beside Ellis. The boy's face was pale, drenched in sweat. His eyes darted between the warning lights like he was trapped inside his own fear. She grabbed his wrist, firm, grounding. "Look at me," she said. He blinked, startled. "Breathe in, out. Now tell me what the bird's doing." "Tail's unstable," he stammered. "Good, you see it. Now fix it, you know how." "I'll crash." "Maybe," she said, "but you'll crash trying, not hiding." He stared at her. The world around them shook as the simulator pitched. Smoke effects hissed. "Your hands know what to do," she said softly. "Trust them, trust you." Slowly he moved again, adjusted the collective, eased the cyclic. The alarms softened. The simulated horizon leveled. Mia smiled faintly. "There you go, Ellis, she's talking to you now." He exhaled hard, tension bleeding from his shoulders. When the simulation ended, the pod fell still. The hatch opened, releasing a cloud of synthetic smoke and the sharp smell of machine oil. Ellis stepped out, trembling but alive. The room erupted in cautious applause from the other trainees. Mia followed him out, wiping sweat from her temple. Whitman stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. "Creative method, Sergeant," he said quietly. "It worked," she replied. He nodded once. "Yeah, it did." Then, after a beat, "You okay?" She hesitated. "Ask me tomorrow." That night Mia sat alone in her office. The simulation replayed on her screen, Ellis freezing, her voice breaking through the noise, the steady recovery. Her pulse still raced, not from adrenaline but from what it had brought back. That moment when the world went silent and she had been the only one to answer. She paused the video. The image froze on her face, eyes fierce, jaw set, and she barely recognized the woman staring back. Was this what Command had seen that day at Hawk's Nest? Was this what her father would have seen, the mechanic who refused to stay grounded? Her gaze drifted to the photograph pinned beside the monitor. Her father again, Captain Daniel Parker, smiling beside that old Huey. "You'd hate this program," she said softly, half laughing. "You always said training should be calm, not chaos." She leaned back, rubbing her eyes. But maybe chaos is the only teacher that listens. 2 days later, Whitman called her into his office. "Sit," he said, tone unreadable. She obeyed. "I reviewed the footage," he began. "You broke 3 safety protocols, overrode the simulation mid-sequence, and entered a live pod under hazardous motion." She stayed silent. He leaned forward. "You want to tell me why?" She met his gaze evenly. "Because he was freezing, sir, and if I'd stayed behind the glass he would have failed. Maybe not in here, but out there. He'd be dead." Whitman exhaled slowly, nodding. "You know, Parker, you've got a real bad habit of being right for all the wrong reasons." That made her smile. "I'll take it." He chuckled, then turned serious again. "Ellis wrote a report this morning, said you saved him, called you the calm in the noise. Thought you should know." Her throat tightened. "He didn't freeze," she said quietly. "He just needed someone to speak first." Whitman studied her for a long moment. "Maybe that's your gift. Not just flying, not fixing, speaking when no one else will." She looked away, fighting the lump in her throat. "Or maybe I just hate silence." He smiled faintly. "Either way, keep hatting it." That evening she returned to the flight line. The sunset painted the Apache in deep gold, rotors glinting like halos. Students were packing up gear, laughing, trading stories of near misses in the simulator. Ellis walked up, helmet under his arm. "Sergeant Parker," he said, voice steadier now, "thank you for what you did." She nodded once. "You did the work, Private. I just reminded you to trust it." He hesitated. "When you came in there, were you scared?" Her answer came after a long breath. "Always," she said. "That's how I know I'm still human." He smiled awkwardly, saluted and walked off. Mia stood there a while longer, watching the sky deepen from gold to purple. The hum of distant rotors filled the air again, low, steady, alive. She looked up, whispering, "Still flying, Dad?" The wind carried her words away, gentle and sure. Sometimes leadership isn't about giving orders. Sometimes it's about walking into the fire to show someone the way out. And sometimes courage is contagious. It spreads quietly, one steady voice at a time. Why did the air suddenly taste like dust again? It started with a single, unfamiliar sound, a low thump that didn't belong to drills or maintenance. Then another. Then the unmistakable whine of an emergency siren that no one at Fort Rucker ever expected to hear. Mia Parker was in the middle of a debrief when the lights flickered once, twice, then went red. The floor trembled. "Earthquake," one recruit whispered. Her instinct said otherwise. The base intercom cracked with static. "Attention, all personnel. Unscheduled inbound, A-60 Black Hawk, critical failure, loss of hydraulics. Crash response teams stand by." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Whitman's voice came over the radio a moment later, tight and clipped. "All emergency instructors to Hangar 3. We've got wounded in the air." Mia's chair scraped back. "Class dismissed, move." Outside, the airfield was chaos, not the organized kind of training, but raw confusion. The sky was heavy with smoke, the scent of burning fuel drifting from somewhere beyond the tree line. Sirens wailed across the tarmac. Mia sprinted toward Hangar 3, boots pounding the concrete, trainees at her heels. A soldier shouted, "Birds coming in hot, hydraulics gone, tail," not responding. She looked up. Over the trees, a dark shape wobbled in the sky, spinning slightly, too fast, too unstable. The Black Hawk. Her stomach dropped. Whitman appeared beside her, headset on, shouting orders to ground control. They've got 4 souls on board, including a flight medic. Tail rotors shot. They're trying to auto-rotate. Mia scanned the horizon. The helicopter dipped dangerously, smoke trailing from its side. They won't make the main strip, she said. Whitman swore. They're 500 meters short. Impact zone's the old maintenance field. Without thinking, Mia was already moving. Parker, he shouted, where the hell are you going? She didn't look back. To do my job. The wind whipped against her face as she sprinted across the open ground, every muscle remembering what chaos felt like. The sound grew louder, rotor blades struggling, dying screaming. The Black Hawk hit hard. A burst of dust and metal tore through the air, followed by the hollow thud of impact. The tail broke away, the fuselage sliding on its side until it stopped near the perimeter fence. Mia hit the dirt just as debris rained down. Then silence. The kind that lasts one heartbeat too long. She pushed up, coughing through smoke, ears ringing. The helicopter burned at the nose, flames licking across twisted panels. Mia, Whitman's voice crackled through the radio. Stay back, fire teams are en route. She ignored him. Ellis, she shouted over her shoulder. The young recruit who'd once frozen in a simulator was right behind her, pale but moving. You wanted real training, she yelled. This is it. He nodded, adrenaline wiping the fear from his face. They ran together, ducking through the smoke. The heat was suffocating. Fuel spilled across the dirt, catching fire in patches. Through the cracked windshield, she could see movement, the pilot and co-pilot trapped, the medic pinned in the back. Grab that extinguisher, she ordered. Ellis obeyed instantly. She yanked open the side hatch, metal groaning under her grip. The blast of heat made her eyes sting. Hang on, she shouted into the cabin. We've got you. The pilot coughed, blood streaking his face. Hydraulics failed on approach. Save it, she said, cutting him off. We'll talk after you're breathing clean air. She and Ellis worked fast, cutting belts, pulling bodies free, dragging them through the smoke. The fire crept closer, roaring louder. Sergeant, we've got 3, Ellis shouted. Where's the medic? She demanded. Ellis hesitated, then pointed. The last crew member was pinned under a collapsed seat frame. Mia dropped to her knees, tried to lift it, too heavy. She gritted her teeth. Help me. Together they heaved. The frame shifted just enough. The medic gasped, half-conscious. Go, Mia shouted. Get them clear. Ellis pulled the medic free and dragged him toward the open air. Mia followed, but just as she turned, she heard it. A sharp pop from somewhere beneath the floor. Fuel line. She barely had time to dive. The explosion threw her backward, heat slamming into her chest. The world spun, colors, sound, then black. When she came to, everything was muffled. Distant shouts, the hiss of foam, the taste of smoke in her mouth. Someone was shaking her shoulder. Sergeant, Mia, can you hear me? Ellis. She blinked, coughing, lungs burning. Everyone out. He nodded. All 4 fire teams got it now. She exhaled, half a laugh, half a sob. Then we did it. He grinned through soot. Yeah, we did it. Medics arrived, checking vitals, spraying foam over her burns. Whitman stormed through the chaos, face pale with fury and relief. Parker, what the hell were you thinking? She coughed again, trying to sit up. Same thing as before, sir. Someone had to move. He stared at her for a long second, then shook his head and almost smiled. You really don't like silence, do you? Not when people are screaming inside it, she said. By nightfall, the fires were out. The wreckage had been secured. 4 survivors stabilized. Mia sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, wrapped in a silver blanket. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by a deep, shaking fatigue. Ellis approached, his uniform torn, face streaked with soot. You okay, Sergeant? She nodded slowly. You kept moving. He gave a weak laugh. Guess I learned from the best. She looked at him. The kid who had once frozen under simulated pressure now standing taller, voice steady. "Proud of you," she said quietly. He smiled. "You know, when that chopper came down, for a second I thought no one's going to step forward, and then I saw you run, and I thought maybe that's what being a soldier means." Mia looked out at the dark horizon. The faint glow of burning fuel still flickered in the distance. "Being a soldier," she said softly, "means doing what scares you again and again, until it scares you a little less." He nodded, the words sinking deep. Whitman joined them, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You realize you just turned a real emergency into the best field exercise this base has ever seen," he said dryly. Mia gave a tired smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You know, Parker, you could have died out there." She shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time I got lucky." He chuckled under his breath. "You ever stop to think maybe it's not luck?" She didn't answer, because she already knew the truth. Luck had nothing to do with it. It was instinct, training, and that same voice that had once said, "I can fly it." Later that night she walked alone along the tarmac. The stars were clear again. The air smelled of wet earth and jet fuel. Behind her, the damaged Black Hawk sat under a tarp, guarded and silent. She stopped beside it, running her fingers along the scorched metal. Another bird that had nearly died. Another reminder that courage doesn't live in the sky, it lives in the hands that refuse to let go. She whispered, "You did good." Her reflection shimmered faintly in the dark glass. For a second, she saw her father's face there too, smiling, proud, as if he'd been watching the whole time. Back in her quarters, she peeled off the bandages from her hands and stared at the burns beneath, not severe, just enough to sting. She laughed softly to herself, always something to fix. Then she looked at the photo on her desk. Captain D. Parker, fly safe. She tapped the glass gently. Still flying, Dad, just different skis. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint, distant thrum of rotors. She listened, eyes closed. And for the first time, it didn't sound like war. It sounded like continuation. Sometimes fate tests you twice. First to see if you can act. Then to see if you'll act again when the memory still hurts. Mia Parker answered both times. Because when silence called, she never stopped replying. Why did applause sound so strange after so much silence? A week had passed since the crash. The smell of fuel was gone, replaced by fresh paint and polished floors. Hangar 3, once charred and blackened, now gleamed under bright white lights. Rows of chairs lined the space. The bass band tuned instruments quietly near the back. Mia Parker stood behind the curtains, palms sweating, heart beating harder than it ever had in combat. "Relax," Whitman murmured beside her, adjusting his dress uniform. "You've faced missiles. You can face a podium." She shot him a dry look. "Missiles don't stare at you while you talk, sir." He smirked. "They explode faster, though." That earned a quiet laugh from her, small but real. Beyond the curtain, the crowd was gathering. Soldiers, cadets, instructors, engineers. Even a few Pentagon officials had flown in. The air buzzed with the kind of anticipation that comes when people realize they're about to witness a story they'll tell for years. The same story Mia had lived through twice, once in war, once in training. She adjusted the small silver pin on her chest, Grease 1. Not a medal, just her call sign, but it carried more weight than any ribbon. A staff sergeant peeked behind the curtain. "They're ready, ma'am." Mia nodded, exhaled, and stepped out. The applause hit her like a wave, loud, warm, unrelenting. She froze for half a second under the floodlights, the sound echoing off the hangar's steel walls. Somewhere in the crowd, she spotted Ellis and the other trainees, standing at attention, eyes bright with pride. She made her way to the podium. The microphone squealed once, then steadied. For a moment she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened. Then she took a slow breath, steady, measured, the way she always did before takeoff. "I was never supposed to stand here," she began, voice soft but clear. "6 years ago, I was the one who fixed things that broke, engines, circuits, bolts that never stayed where they should. I wasn't the one meant to fly them." A ripple of murmurs moved through the audience. She smiled faintly. "But sometimes life doesn't wait for permission." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Soldiers she'd saved, students she'd trained, officers who'd once questioned her. "When I heard that call, any Apache pilot on base, I didn't answer because I wanted to be a hero. I answered because silence scared me more than death." The crowd was silent now, the kind of silence that listens. "I didn't know if I'd come back. I didn't know if I could even do it. But I knew one thing, no one else was moving, so I did." She swallowed hard, the emotion thickening her voice. "And when that Black Hawk went down last week, I watched one of my students do the same move when everyone froze. That's the real victory. Not that I flew once, but that others learned how to." Her eyes found Ellis in the crowd. He stood straighter. "That's what courage is," she continued. "Not fearlessness, not glory, just motion, even if it's trembling." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the hangar. Whitman, off to the side, nodded slowly. She glanced at him, smiling faintly. "Lieutenant Colonel Whitman once told me that leadership isn't about orders. It's about timing, about knowing when silence needs to be broken." A chuckle from the back. He was right. She looked out over the audience, faces young and old, tired and hopeful. The world remembers the loud moments, the explosions, the victories, but the truth is history changes in whispers, in small voices that say, "I can fly it," when no one else will. Her voice faltered slightly, and she exhaled, regaining composure. "I don't know what comes next, but I know this. The next time silence falls, someone out there will answer it. Maybe one of you. And when you do, remember, courage doesn't shout, it acts." She stepped back. The applause rose again, slower this time, deeper. Not celebration, gratitude. After the ceremony, people crowded around, handshakes, photos, congratulations. Mia smiled politely, but her mind was elsewhere. The weight of the speech lingered heavy on her chest, like the echo of a rotor long after landing. Whitman found her near the exit, away from the noise. "You did good," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "That your official review, sir?" He grinned. "Unofficially, you made half the colonels cry. I'd call that effective leadership." She chuckled softly, but her expression dimmed. "It feels strange, sir, all this attention." He nodded. "Because it's not what you fought for." "Yeah," she said. "I didn't fight to be seen. I fought because someone had to." "That's why they're here," he said. "Because people follow that kind of honesty." Mia looked down at her hands, the faint scars still visible beneath the sleeves. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The field, the noise." Whitman's eyes softened. "Every day, but I've learned peace can be just as hard." She smiled faintly. "Tell me about it." That evening, as the crowd dispersed, she found herself drawn back to the hangar's far wall, the place where the ceremony's lights didn't reach. There, behind a glass display case, sat the same memorial she'd visited months ago. 2 flight badges. Captain D. Parker, fly safe. Sergeant A. Parker, grease 1. And between them, that faded photograph, father and daughter beside an old Huey, both smiling at a son long gone. Beneath the display, a brass plaque gleamed in the soft light. She fixed the bird, then flew it. She stood there for a long while, hands folded behind her back, the echo of applause still fatting somewhere behind her. Then she whispered, "We did good, Dad." Outside, the base was quiet. The stars were bright. The night air carried the hum of distant engines, training flights returning from evening runs. She walked across the tarmac, the moon reflecting off puddles left from a late-day rain. Her reflection followed her, small, steady, human. Halfway across the field, she heard footsteps. Ellis jogged up beside her, slightly out of breath. "Sergeant, sorry, didn't mean to bother you." Mia smiled. "You didn't." He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a small patch, frayed around the edges. "I had this made," he said, "for the new readiness unit." She took it gently. Embroidered on the dark fabric was a simple design, a wrench crossed with rotor blades, and underneath, "When silence falls, we rise." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "It's perfect." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Figured it was time our team had an emblem." She studied the patch again, tracing the words with her thumb. "You know what this means, right?" He frowned. "What?" "That I'm officially old enough to have people designing patches in my honor." He laughed. "It's not for you, Sergeant, it's because of you." That made her smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. "Fair enough." She handed it back. "Keep it safe. Someday, someone's going to need to remember what it stands for." He nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am." Then he hesitated, voice lower. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you ran into that burning Black Hawk, weren't you afraid it would end the same way your dad's crash did?" The question hit her harder than she expected. She looked down at the dark tarmac, the reflection of distant lights trembling across it. "Yeah," she said finally, "I was terrified." "Then why'd you do it?" She turned toward the sky, a plane crossing high above, blinking red against the black. "Because every time I fix a bird, or teach someone to fly, or pull someone out of the fire," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "it's like I get one more chance to rewrite the ending." Ellis nodded slowly, understanding. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." She smiled faintly. "Don't thank me yet, you still owe me 10 flight drills." He groaned. "Yes, ma'am." "Dismissed." He saluted and jogged off toward the barracks, leaving her alone beneath the wide Alabama sky. Mia stood there for a long time, watching the horizon. The air was cool, the kind that carries memories instead of words. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt carried by it. Because the silence that once broke her now reminded her that she'd filled it with motion, with courage, with life. Sometimes, legacies aren't written in medals or reports. They're written in the people who watched you move when no one else did, and learned that they could too. How long does it take for the echoes of war to fade? A year? A lifetime? Or maybe they never really fade at all. They just change shape. Years had passed. The war was history now, filed, footnoted, forgotten by most. But at Fort Rucker, stories still lived in the quiet hum of hangars, in the smell of oil and steel, and in the sound of rotor blades slicing through the evening air. Sergeant Amelia, Mia, Parker had been promoted twice since Hawk's Nest. She didn't talk much about the medals that came with it. They stayed boxed away in a drawer, beside her father's folded flag, and a cracked flight helmet that still smelled faintly of burnt fuel. She'd traded battlefields for classrooms, chaos for conversation. Yet some nights, when the wind blew just right, she swore she could still hear the old radio static whispering across the sky. Any Apache pilot on base. It didn't haunt her anymore. It reminded her who she was. The sun was setting over the airfield. The light was soft and golden, spilling over the tarmac like liquid fire. Mia stood near the edge of the runway, clipboard in hand, watching her latest class finish their final evaluations. 5 helicopters rose from the ground in perfect formation, each one steady, disciplined, alive. The hum vibrated through her boots, familiar, comforting, almost sacred. She didn't need to shout anymore. Her students knew what to do. They had learned how to stay calm when alarms screamed, how to move when everyone froze, how to trust themselves when silence demanded an answer. Ellis was among them now, not as a trainee, but as an instructor in his own right. Mia smiled faintly as she watched him guide a nervous recruit through his first auto-rotation landing. The kid flared too late, bounced once, then steadied. The rotor wash blew dust across the field. She caught Ellis's glance from across the tarmac, a brief nod, a quiet exchange of understanding. He had found his voice, and because of that she could finally rest. After the drills the field emptied, the air cooled, the sky turned a soft lavender. Mia walked the perimeter road alone, hands in her jacket pockets, listening to the fatting thrum of machines she'd once worshipped. Somewhere nearby, cadets were laughing, arguing, tossing wrenches into toolboxes. The sound made her smile. Life, ordinary life. She passed Hangar 4, her hangar. Inside, under a spotlight, stood the same Apache she had once rebuilt and flown into war. Grease 1. No longer airworthy, no longer needed but not forgotten. The Army had restored it, polished it, turned it into a training display. The plaque beneath its nose simply read, "When no one else answered." She stepped inside. The air smelled of metal and dust, just like it had the morning everything changed. Her boots echoed softly across the concrete. She climbed onto the stub wing and into the cockpit, moving slowly, reverently. The seat creaked under her weight. The controls were cold beneath her gloves. The old photo of her father was still taped above the altimeter, faded now, edges curled but still there. "Hey, Dad," she whispered, smiling faintly. "Guess we made it." She ran a hand over the console, remembering every vibration, every hum. The ghosts here weren't heavy anymore. They were company. She looked out through the canopy at the darkening horizon, eyes soft. "You were right," she murmured. "The sky really is where you find who you are." She sat there a while longer, letting the hum of memory wash over her. The next morning came quiet and clean. Fort Rucker was hosting its annual open house. Families, veterans, school kids walking through hangars that smelled of history and new beginnings. Mia guided a small group, mostly children, through the maintenance bay. They looked up in awe at the size of the helicopters, their eyes wide, mouths open. One little girl, maybe 10, tugged at her sleeve. "Did you ever fly one, ma'am?" Mia knelt so their eyes were level. "Once," she said, "when nobody else could." The girl frowned. "Weren't you scared?" Mia smiled softly. "More than I can explain." "So why'd you do it?" She paused, considering the question the way her father once had. "Because sometimes," she said, "the people who fix things are the only ones left who know how to keep them alive." The girl nodded slowly, the answer settling in a place she might not understand yet, but one day would. Later, as the visitors left, Whitman found her standing near the flight line. He'd aged too, silver creeping through his hair, the stiffness of old injuries slowing his stride. But the spark in his eyes hadn't dimmed. "You always did look more at home out here than behind a desk," he said. She grinned. "Desks don't have turbines." He chuckled. "The program's grown. 3 bases, 40 instructors, over 200 crisis-ready techs. You built something, Parker." She looked toward the horizon. "We built it, sir." He nodded, quiet pride settling between them. After a moment he added, "They're nomming the new training hangar after you." She blinked, startled. "What?" He smirked. "Don't act surprised. You've been rewriting the rulebook since the day you stole that Apache." "I didn't steal it," she said, smiling. "I borrowed it." "For a war," he said dryly. They both laughed, the sound easy and genuine. Then his tone softened. "You know, Parker, someday I'll retire. You should take over the program." She looked at him, genuinely caught off guard. "I'm not sure I'm the right one." He tilted his head. "You're exactly the right one, because you remember what it felt like before anyone believed you could." She didn't answer right away, just nodded, eyes misting slightly. "I'll think about it." "Do that," he said, turning to leave. "And when you decide, don't wait for silence." That evening the base quieted again. The last helicopters returned, lights blinking red in the fading dusk. Mia sat on the steps outside the hangar, watching the final bird land. The sky above glowed faintly orange, the same color it had been the day her story began. She took the old photograph from her pocket, the one that had followed her through every chapter of her life. She smoothed its creases gently, studying her father's smile, the way his hand rested on her shoulder. She whispered, "You taught me how to fly without ever leaving the ground." A tear rolled down her cheek, catching the last light of sunset. She didn't wipe it away. The airfield lights flickered on, one by one. The rotors of the last helicopter slowed, blades spinning lazily, whispering against the night. Mia closed her eyes and listened. Not to the sound of war, not to silence, but to everything in between, the heartbeat of life still moving forward. Years later, the story would be told to new recruits, to mechanics, to anyone who doubted their worth. They would learn about Sergeant Amelia Parker, the woman who wasn't supposed to fly, who heard silence and answered it with courage. Some would call her reckless. Some would call her brave. But the truth was simpler. She was human. And when the moment came, she acted. Inside the hangar, the Apache sat under dim light, dust settling softly on its frame. The inscription beneath it had worn with time, but the words were still legible. She fixed the bird, then flew it. A small brass plaque, added years later, read, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The camera lingered there, slow, reverent, quiet. The faint hum of rotor blades echoed in the background like memory. Then a final voice, calm, steady, filled with pride, spoke over the scene. "Heroes aren't always the ones who were trained to fly. Sometimes they're the ones who refuse to stay grounded." A soft pause. And when the world went silent, she answered,